I invite Ms. Sabrina Mowlah-Baksh.
Thank you. Members of Soroptimist International, President and members of the head table, the usual suspects in our fraternity, Inspector Claire Guy Allen. I often tell her I don't know who's following who, because everywhere I am, she is, and everywhere she is, I am. Board member of CADV, Mr. Marcus Kisoon, Vice President and Director of CADV, Ms. Sonika Maz. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here this evening and this afternoon as we continue with all kinds of activities to promote and address this very vexing thing that we're dealing with of gender-based violence. I don't know if many of you all know, but CADV was instrumental in two major things, and that is our founders, Diana Mahabir Wyatt and Radhika Seth. They were the first two who founded the first two shelters in the country, inclusive of the shelter, one in San Fernando and one in North. And I am very pleased to say that these two shelters have been through it all, and they are still the best functioning shelters in the country today. And out of approximately, when I joined CADV about 5 years ago, there are about 10 shelters. Now that's been whittled down to about 6 functioning shelters as a result of inadequate resources. Medina House had to close down completely and a couple others. So we are thankful for people like you who just help us to continue the fight. Another important piece of history is that our past president, Roberta Clark, was one of those women who were responsible for starting this global 16 days of activism, Caribbean woman. And so when we see this global campaign, we think it's something originating out of the UN and an important agency globally, but of one of our very own Caribbean women who stood as president of our organization, started this global campaign. So I think we really do some important work in Trinidad and Tobago and in the Caribbean. And so the Coalition Against Domestic Violence was founded in the early 1980s, and it was started so that there can be a response to this issue of domestic violence. We probably would all know that 1 in every 3 women in this country have reported experiencing at least one form of gender-based violence, of domestic intimate partner violence. I was fortunate there were 2 national surveys done, one in 2017, done by funded by the IDB. I was part of that, and there was a qualitative study done by the IGDS under Dr. Gabriel Hussein, which I was also part of the research team. So I know this thing inside out. My story started when I was around early 20s in a community in Tableland when I started working even as a volunteer. And I went to this community and I saw this house barricaded. And after a couple of occasions, I asked the people, why is that house always closed up? And why am I not seeing anybody in that house? They said, well, if you only knew. The woman was locked in the house when the man left. No windows open, no doors open. She could not talk to anybody. And so that, I mean, apart from growing up in a community of violence, that was one example, over 25 years ago, of the extreme cases of DV that women go through. And that woman, no neighbor could have helped her. She was locked in there. If any emergency happened, she was stuck there, and the perpetrator left her there. Anyway, here I am, umpteen years later, as the general manager of the Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And we work around 3 areas. The first one is the provision of psychosocial support services, where we provide free counseling, legal support, and we have a social worker that does case management for over 50 clients a month. Last year alone, we provided support for over 500 women, and all our services are free. Very importantly, out of the 1 in every 3 women who experience domestic violence, 1 in every 3 do not disclose. So if we are seeing 500, over 600, between 500 and 600 per year, and those are the ones disclosing, can you imagine the ones who are not disclosing and who are not seeking help? When we were going through COVID, it was referred to as the silent pandemic or the shadow pandemic, this thing called domestic violence / under the rubric of gender-based violence. Our second area of work is our policy influencing, and through that we've done critical work, and we were a key player in several key pieces of legislation. The introduction of the Domestic Violence Act, which was done in 1999, and then the amendment, I think it was done in 2020, Marcus, Inspector, 2020. We were very instrumental in getting that piece of legislation amended through what we created something called an Alliance for State Action, in which we have 20 civil society organizations lobbying for legislation. We also worked on the Sex Offenders Registry through the Alliance for State Action, which we got introduced, and sit as a committee member that was now working towards introduction of the Sexual Harassment Bill. So we are working on several key critical pieces of legislation. A very important one that we were able to craft was a domestic violence workplace policy. We crafted that for the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce. And with that policy, we asked the corporate sector to introduce that so they can protect their employees in the workplace who experience DV in the workplace, and protect them and even provide help for perpetrators. Our third area, now if you give me a chance, I can go all day, so I promise you I'm wrapping up. So the third area, of course, is our prevention work, and through our prevention work, so we do capacity building and training for nurses, the judiciary, police officers, first responders, civil society organizations. Next week, we'll do a training for guidance officers attached to the secondary schools. And we prepare them and help them to understand how to treat with DV. We also go to schools, the corporate sector. We are doing a sensitization next week as well. For NIPDEC, we've done for Trinidad and Tobago Mortgage Finance. Some of the major companies, we go every year to Massey to speak to them, to speak to their supervisors and so on, helping them to say, listen, this is what you look out for. If you see it, this is what you do. And so our prevention work spans the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago, and so it's a pretty exhaustive, and we've reached thousands through our prevention program. And so I will end here. I know there's a battery of competent speakers. I remain available for any questions after. I've walked with some brochures, which I have in a basket under the Christmas tree. And so please feel free to help yourselves to some of the brochures, and if you need more, I'd be more than happy to make it available to you. And I also remain available to chat if you want me. If you're in a space that I can do some outreach, that I can come in and do some work and some capacity building, I'd be more than happy. Thank you so much for the opportunity, everyone.